While we are getting ready here for the panel, please, as I mentioned, I'm sure some of you have a lot of questions. Get your questions ready. We have actually 3 ARC folks, actually, they are in the audience with mics. So we will call on you in just a minute, a couple of minutes here. But before we get to you, let me ask both Blake and Peter. Let me start with you, Peter. You heard the presentations from Sandy and Don and Mike. Would you like to comment on the vision that they have presented?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I think it's very important to recognize that where we're at today is also not something where suppliers, any of us in the supply industry, have been sitting quietly in our labs inventing stuff. But I think actually also where we got to for today is the product of collaboration with users, with customers, and then building platforms based on where we've been able to develop technologies and where we've been together with users and customers seeing technology go. So the vision based on open standards, based on innovation that we can build on from neighboring industries is very much a vision we share and subscribe to. And if you think back of how we've been a very, not just a promoter of the standard in terms of the electrical systems talking to each other with the IEC 61850 standard, but also the power and automation side talking to each other in order to, as one of the dimensions of the vision, have the electrical world and the automation world on the same fundamental technologies come together. I think this is a good direction and a next step in that good direction.
Thank you. Blake?
Yeah, if you consider the fundamental business problems that Sandy and Don talked about, they're very compelling to us as well. Starting with the legacy installations, you have these very large custom systems. Some of them are 30 and 40 years old, and the prospect of having to rip them out completely and to wholesale change everything from the I/O to the controller to the information systems is just too difficult and has too much risk to be an effective way going forward. When Sandy talks about his concept of being able to configure I/O and to have auto discovery and to be able to have things that just work, then we completely subscribe to those concepts, and we're focusing our entire development to be able to add the performance under the hood so that what presents to the operator is as simple as possible and can thrive in a multi-vendor environment.
Great. I think in process industries, they are known to be, customers are very conservative. And clearly right now, we are talking about step change and so forth. Do you feel our plants, or what do we have to do to get our plants ready, get our people ready to sort of operate these plants of the future? I would like some comments from you. Maybe Mike, if you wouldn't mind starting that, what's your feeling? What do you think at Georgia Pacific that you got to do to really move to or do the digital transformation?
Begin with, I think you need to understand yourself first. When you say conservative, I would classify the industry as risk averse. We've all grown up that way. In order to get away from that, we have to understand that there is more at risk by not doing this than there is by doing this. And it takes me back. I remember that it's tough for any of us to predict the future. The only future you can probably predict with any degree of certainty is the one that you create yourself. And so just remember, don't make a null decision. Don't allow anybody to say amen. And make sure that going forward, you understand that that risk of doing nothing is more risky than doing something.
Would you guys comment any, or you already, obviously, you're ready for change? I take it ExxonMobil is ready for change. Any more comments? Okay, go ahead,
I
Don.
think in the downstream in chemicals, we're constantly trying to optimize and improve our plants, which translates into a spirit of continuous improvement with what we do with control and automation. But our tendency to want to stay on a platform for many decades. I mean, Harry Forbes did a great calculation on, if you compound Moore's law, how far behind the pace of technology change does that lead us? So what we don't like is the big disruptive changes that we're faced with right now. And our senior management, it's really fascinating. When I engage with them, they'll tell me, say, Don, we don't want small improvements from you guys. We want big improvements. So our appetite for risk at senior management level is healthy. It's different when you get down to the operational level. Change is a very, very frightening thing there. So that's kind of the reality. And what we're trying to do, I would say, is just find a way that we can keep track of the pace of technology in a less risky, a less disruptive manner than the prospect that we're facing today.
Sandy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, we don't have a choice. We have to make big changes. If we continue the approach that we've taken for the past few decades, it will happen very slowly, and we just can't afford the time any longer. We want to avoid the disruption, but we're working with our suppliers closely to come up with solutions that won't be disruptive. I don't think that those are conflicting expectations, getting big step changes in a quick manner and disruption. We think if we work closely with our suppliers, we can come up with solutions that achieves both the innovation that we're looking for at the speed that we want it at without big disruption.
I'd like to maybe turn this around a little bit for you and Blake and Peter. Maybe let's start with you, Blake. How are you trying to reduce the risk, or what are you doing to help your customers? I mean, I think our industry right now, we have a unique thing. I mean, all the decades, several decades I've been in the industry, customers are they wouldn't stand up and say, this is what we want. Mm-hmm. We now have customers standing up and saying, this is what we like to have, and this is where we like to go. How are you trying to help your customers?
Well, Andy, a few things come to mind. I think the first is to make the incorporation of new technology an evolution as opposed to a step change disconnect. So we talk about a platform that is future-proof, and we know that new technology is going to be continuously introduced, but we're going to try to keep that as much as a curve and not a step change as possible. The second is to simplify the interoperability between our various devices and the other aspects of a control system. When programmable controllers came out, they were often the only microprocessor-based device that operators interacted with. And of course, that's not the case today, and the younger workers know what plug and play looks like. And so the industry is demanding that simplicity. And then I think the final is around the way that we prepare our own people as well as people working with our equipment, and it's a combination of enabling them through increasing their skills throughout their career. It's augmenting their own skills with things like remote monitoring so that you can project the expertise of others. And then the final one, and Mike talked a little bit about this, it's changing the work itself and not just putting people into the same tracks that they may have been doing earlier in their careers. Yeah.
Before we go to Peter, could we please, could you raise your hands if you have a question so that we can get a mic to you folks? Do we have a questions out there? Folks, please raise your hand so that our folks can bring a mic to you. Yeah. So think questions. We are hoping you have a lot of questions. So try to think about some questions, folks. Okay. But Peter, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think when we talk about a conservative industry, there's a dimension of conservatism that we will have to preserve through all this, which is being conservative in terms of protecting human lives, protecting the safety of the operations. So the art for us will be to, on the one hand side, be completely uncompromised in this dimension and actually use automation for even further supporting the safe and secure unmanning of operations, as an example, the remote collaboration, the remote operation, while at the same time doing radical changes on the supporting platforms. And I personally think, and I've experienced in various roles, that innovation happens very often at interfaces. And I think it's the interfaces with other industries that Sandy has already pointed to, and Don. It's the interfaces between disciplines also. And I would say there's also the generation interfaces. If we have the experienced people who are there, who have a lot of knowledge about certain things that we will have to preserve, while at the same time there's the digital natives who have a lot of knowledge about how they intuitively use certain pieces of information technology today. I think getting the best of those two rather than the worst of those two will be the art that we will have to master in order not to land in Knock'em stuff.
Yeah, I think we have a question over there.
Yeah, it's taken us 20 years to dig ourselves into this hole of systems that are hard to maintain and difficult. How many years is it going to take to work our way out of that hole?
Good
You want me to answer that? It better not take longer than 10.
Any comments? I mean, it is a good question, but believe me, it better not take 20. It better not take 10. I would say it better not take 5. I think if you're talking, just think how fast the last 5 years where we have come, technology has come. I think if we are taking years, in my view, that would be too late. I welcome comments from you folks.
But I think we have to find ways to accelerate it. So following the old processes for developing new technologies just won't work. I mentioned it in my speech that when we go to qualified technologies, we have our own internal requirements that we provide to our suppliers. They then have, before that, they have to get certification from some agency, and so they go through whatever the qualification process is for that. Then they have their own internal testing that they have to do to make sure the product is ready to go. Why do we have to do those in 3 separate steps? It ought to be one step. We all have the same objective, is to get a product that's going to meet the needs and is going to be reliable and safe. And whether it be the certifying agency, the company that's developing the product, or the person that's going to use the product, it's the same objective, and we ought to do it once. So there's many things in that process that we followed historically that we've got to change in order to do it in 5 years or less versus the 20 years it's taken us to get here.
My question, I'm a project manager, and I'm trying to actually implement a lot of these innovative ideas. As I look at documents and I look at presentations, the one thing I struggle with is how do you take the opportunities of Internet of Things, big data, analytics, and put that in a format to senior leaders such that they will authorize the millions of dollars of spending, plus address the culture change. If you're saying 5 years, that's a lot of culture change and a lot of projects in 5 years. And when I come to these type of events, I struggle with finding how do I justify the spending?
Yeah, good question. Maybe, Don, do you guys want to comment?
I mean, yeah, we're very rigorous about economic justifications, but my engagement with our senior leaders right now is, technologies like Internet of Things and data analytics in particular are being accepted on faith with the intuitive understanding of these senior decision makers that there is a prize at the end of the day. So I think in this area, the appetite to take a chance is pretty high.
If I can add to that, I think what's very helpful in that respect, and of course the basic laws of economics, as Don was just saying, still apply. But the World Economic Forum this year was actually talking about the fourth industrial revolution with a mix of industrial decision makers, politicians, and other stakeholders. So I really think the awareness also at the most senior management and political levels for the topic has risen enormously during I would say, the last 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, agree. And,
I think within a manufacturing environment, when we look at new development or new investments, we ensure that it's going to add value to a particular process in one or more of 4 areas, and it's faster time to market, it's lower total cost of ownership, it's the increased utilization of your assets, or it's enterprise risk reduction. And if we can't find a clear line of sight path between what we're doing in the systems or the products and quantified value in one of those areas, it's probably not worth doing. So that's kind of the rubric that we use.
okay, let's go to question way over there, back there.
Yes. What has been and or will be the impact of force reductions in the drive for some big end users to innovation?
So the question is, what sort of workforce reductions
Yeah, layoffs.
will go with?
Yeah, just what has been the effect or what will be the effect? Maybe maybe there has been no effect.
Well, I look at it differently. I've had, in some of the things that we've promoted, we've shifted what various groups do. For example, with our main automation contractor concept, there's a view that we're taking work away from the EPCs and we're giving it to the automation providers. But that isn't the way that we promoted it, because I think today, in that particular case, the EPCs are doing a lot of things to successfully deliver their projects that they probably weren't planning to do anyway. And so what we've said is that we're assigning things to the group that's best able to deliver it in the most efficient way. And if there's some things that push to the automation providers, then so be it. If there's some things that the EPCs can now do that they should have been doing that they couldn't do because of all the other things they were doing, then they'll be able to do that. So I don't know that there's necessarily a reduction in workforce that it's not an objective of ours to achieve that. We're just making sure that the right resources are doing the right things, and they can do things that they should have been doing in the first place but couldn't because of all these other things that they have to do to deliver a successful project. So, again, it's related to the answer to that is kind of related to the other one. I think the way that we package this stuff is important. I know in selling the new approaches within our company, we had to understand who the audience was that we were selling it to. And as the audience changed, then the way you promoted it changed. So in a particular case, if you're meeting with senior executives, you need to understand what problems they're trying to solve, and then demonstrate to them how the things you're promoting are going to solve those problems. When you go to the operating organization, there's a different set of things that they're worried about, and then you have to demonstrate to them how the solutions you're promoting are going to address those issues. So there's a key to making this work and to get it accepted, and it has to do with the way we're packaging the information and also tailoring it to the audience that we're selling it to.
Mike, I know at Georgia Pacific you are looking at a lot of, workforce issues and the future, workers and so forth. Could you comment on this?
Yeah, as I think about your question, I think it's really important for us to understand, and I think we're all in this boat. If I ask you all, how many people in this room thinking about retirement in the next 10 years? How many folks do you think it would be? In reality, in our workforce, the average age is over 55 years old, and which means that if they work till 65, you got 10 years. The truth is most people don't work till 65. So there's a threat there, and there's not really a good talent pool behind these folks who are about to retire to replace them. And as you look at what that talent pool looks like, you have to say, how can I make best use of the talent I'm going to have left? and that is deploying some degree of automation. I think that's the reality we're all faced with, is that talent is going to go home. It's going to go home because it has gray hair, and the talent that's left is going to be much younger, much less experienced, and without getting the information that exists in the operators today into the automation, your odds of success are going to be greatly diminished.
Okay. Good. Could we go to a question from over here? Yeah, please. Yeah.
Hi. My question has to do with the workforce, but it's kind of a completely different side of the question. How did you handle the truly IT functions that can't be automated, such as pulling of cables, management of servers, and things like that, that have to be dealt with as you're implementing all of this? Where do they fall? Who handles that now?
Is anybody would like to
You
take?
still
Go
have
ahead.
to pull cable, but honestly, when one of the things that digitization has enabled, we go to digital signal transmission as opposed to analog, has reduced the number of cables you have to pull tremendously. If you look at the architectural diagrams that Sandy's team uses to communicate the significance of smart configurable I/O, you will see that as a result of innovation, you have reduced the number of screw terminations you have to do from 20 plus to like 4 to 6 or something like that. So it's these innovations that make the work more efficient. Yeah, so we're still going to need people to do tasks, but we're trying to make the tasks that still have to be done simpler.
Yeah. Good. Okay. How about a question over here?
Yes. Hello? Okay. For the expansion, and this is, I guess, more to the suppliers, most facilities think in terms of a section in that facility. And through automation, what we're starting to see, especially when you get to analytics and APCs, is that the realm of process controls is no longer just centralized to a small area or a piece of equipment. It's expanding out, and I think it was mentioned earlier this morning that now you can go to enterprise level control, not just a localized level of control. But my question is, how are you working with your clients to change that mentality? Because one of the things that seems to be a restriction is what I know compared to what I can do.
Okay. Go ahead, Peter.
If I look at it, basically we're seeing in increasing parts of our business, we're seeing a sort of collaboration triangle, I would call it, between the actual management of and crew of the plant, mine, mill, vessel, if we're in a marine context also, and then there, be it engineering center, be it fleet management, asset management. The different industries call this different things, but it's right where the action is. It's somewhere centralized and then supported by teams in our remote collaboration centers. And this is not science fiction. This is stuff we do today in the oil and gas industries, in the marine industries, for instance, but also in areas like robotics and discrete manufacturing. So working on the same data, you don't always have the full expertise for a certain situation, an abnormal situation that you may need handling, and then you pull the right expertise together in a situational way to resolve the situation as fast as we can. And we have many good examples of how that is really changing the way not only people work together between production and enterprise within a single corporation, but also actually across corporate boundaries.
Andy,
Blake, go ahead.
if I can add to that, I think that it really is a paradigm shift in that the architecture has jumped down to the four walls of a particular plant and might be enterprise-wide. It might also be applicable to very highly distributed production assets as well. And the concept of scalability becomes really important. So if you can do some things local to the actual control process, if you were performing some basic analytics, for instance, on the junction temperature of a power semiconductor, you don't need to go to the cloud for that. In fact, you probably won't be able to close a loop fast enough to do you any good. So that's very close to the action. On the other hand, if you're doing OEE benchmarking across multiple cookie lines, then the cloud is a great place to do it. So that idea of scalability is going to be a really useful concept to those who can pull that off.
Excellent. Okay, question here. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, for Exxon. If I understood, many good goals of the programs you're setting up, and kind of calibrate that a bit. One of the key ones is multi-vendor interoperability. And the Lockheed contract for this prototype system, does that go right down to the controllers and sensors, or what's the vision? I'm trying to figure the outcome of that, and then where that moves you in this continuum or moving to revolution.
Well, I think the sensors problem is already sorted out. Controllers, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, I think there is a question over here, Tim. And also there is a question back there, please. Mike? Yeah. Oh, Tim, over here.
Oh, right here. Yeah. My question is, there's so much requirement of new disruptive technology, which you mentioned. The disruptive technology brings so many benefits. And on the other hand, the automation suppliers which you are locked in, the big names, they have traditionally been slow to come out with interoperability as well as these technologies. So on one hand, we want auto discovery, we want to use the drawings coming from other P&I drawings to be automatically converted into graphics. So there's so much dependency on the innovative approaches of existing automation suppliers. So on one hand, we want to use disruptive technologies. On the other hand, for a large measure, we are locked in. How do you balance these two things?
Okay. Don? Yeah, just Sandy, go ahead.
What do you think is going to happen with DICE? I'll answer this.
Well, our plan for DICE is for all of our future projects, we will use it. So each of the automation suppliers are coming up with their solution for DICE, and that will save us a significant amount of time in commissioning. It'll save a significant amount of time in the documentation that's created. So, so we're in the process of developing the processes and the tools to effectively implement DICE for our next project. So.
Yeah, so I mean, the path forward is going to be, we things that are happening in the standards bodies, like and the suppliers like the FDI. These are good trends. They're moving us in the right direction. I'm certainly not smart enough to know how this story is going to play out, how fast we're going to move in the direction of greater degree of interoperability, but we're just trying to set the game up for success and for speedy convergence on optimal solutions in a pro-competitive way. I don't know how else to better answer that question.
Yeah. Blake or Peter, you guys have a comment? Okay.
Well, we're going to have to get faster. The period of change in getting new innovation to market is going to have to be faster, or people who aren't traditional suppliers are going to enter this market, and we're going to have a whole new set of threats to deal with. I think part of the answer is increased partnering, and to be able to tap into knowledge flows that might not reside within our full-time development staff. And so being better at partnering and being able to set the endpoint of when a certain innovation has to get to market, and then work backwards from that and determine what you can do internally and what you need to partner with, is going to become more prevalent in our development flows.
Yeah, I think the manufacturer's on a piece of that too. Your message, when you talked about the best is the enemy of good enough, and you didn't say it that way, but that's what you meant, that a lot of this speed is going to come from that mentality that take what they supply, it's good enough, and stop messing with it.
Question back there?
Good morning. we've heard about standards interoperability at the device and control level, but in each of your organizations, how are standards playing a role at the enterprise level, and how are you managing, or are you able to manage the system-to-system interoperability at that enterprise level for moving data, or at least, or even more, linking that data across the enterprise?
I don't know if anybody here wants to take that. Well, I would make a comment. I think once you going to the enterprise level, by the way, now we are talking about actually, working with enterprise companies, SAPs and Oracles, and also the cloud. There's a whole another set of actually standards over there. I think once you bring the data up, there is a different standards, and I don't think we are here addressing those standards. Here we are really focused more on automation and maybe level 3 MES level, but I think there are whole different challenges at the higher level, but again, things are moving there as well. If you go at cloud level, there is a open platforms at the cloud level, and obviously, sometimes you can have standards even at the high level, with the dominant companies. Like, we have for mobile devices, we have Apple and Android. Essentially those two are kind of becoming like big platforms, and everybody can integrate to that. But I think that's another set of different standards companies have to address. Would you like to comment, anybody else? Yeah.
Maybe I comment. I think it's a delicate balance between innovation and standardization. So I really look forward to participating in the process that Don and Sandy have set in motion. We know from earlier waves of innovation in the industry that where we were able to actually converge on one standard at a moment when most of the innovation has actually happened, that has enabled productivity both for the users of that technology as well as producers of the technology. But I think in this room also many people will remember some of the time we spent in the field bus trenches, where basically the fact that was a standard and another standard, and they were competing with each other, I think that cost the supply as well as the user industries 10 years, and we're only healing from it in more recent years. So the right time and the right rigor of standardization is going to be essential.
Yeah. I would add another comment. In fact, actually, right now, challenge for most enterprise companies is to get at the data, because most of the data, comes from automation systems and so forth. So that's where I personally think if we can come up with some sort of open platform that lots of companies can access the data a lot easier than actually we can today, it will actually launch a whole wave of innovation. I know there are at least several hundred analytics companies out there. Right now, all of them, have a challenge to get the data and so forth. So I think, in essence, what we are talking about is actually opening this whole fire hose of data so that actually lots of companies can access it, and hopefully, they can analyze it to make a lot more sense out of it.
Yeah, I guess, I'll just ask a follow-up to that then, and you may have just answered the question. From looking at it at the enterprise level, a lot of the problems that we see today, or some of the problems we see today, is because engineering systems, MES systems, ERP systems have all been developed in the silos of their expertise, and no one's looked at the system-to-systems integration at a macro level to look at how the socio-technical pieces all fit together. So in terms of the work or the initiatives you're all doing in terms of automating on the manufacturing side or at the control side at the device and control level, are you integrating into the enterprise or working with that, and what are you seeing across that socio-technical, are there any socio-technical barriers you're seeing within your companies to integrate MES into the larger enterprise to be able to get at the data and move it between either a PDM system or into customer and supplier management?
Blake, go ahead.
Well, maybe just a comment that relates back to an earlier question about what happens to all the IT people. as this happens. I mean, the convergence of the information technology and the operational technology is going to happen with organizational, it's going to have organizational design implications as well, because as that IT technology becomes required on the plant floor, you have to have the people who understand those applications and all the new things that can go wrong in the part of the facility that's not carpeted. And so bringing together that domain expertise with the IT experts is really going to be critical, and most suppliers are not organized that way to have that pervasive interaction of the technology developers and the application experts. And most of you as users also have barriers that inhibit the easy interaction of the people who have the communications and the compute technology with the people who understand what's being produced and how it's being produced on the plant floor. So that's going to change a lot of the way that we're organized.
Okay, let's move to the next question right here. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious, do you see this moving forward as maybe repurposing technology from other domains, or do you see sort of a major development effort in order to achieve what you're after?
Well, for us, we've said to ourselves that we don't see, I mean, most of the technology that's required to instantiate our vision is already available. It might involve small repurposing. I frequently use the phrase Field Bus 2.0 to communicate to my team what we need to do to reassemble existing well-established technologies, but perhaps in slightly different ways. We think the rate limiting steps are more commercial change, not technical change.
Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add perhaps that we heard from Blake earlier about scalability, and I think there are parts of the application space that already today with commercial off-the-shelf technologies, you can have complete solutions together. If I take, for instance, irrigation systems, we do cloud-controlled irrigation systems. We have cloud-based electrical vehicle charging networks in operation today with the technologies there. So very little delta needed. And in other applications, if you think of unmanned operation in remote locations and with all the safety and security boundaries that clearly we need to respect, it's a little more delta there that you need to put into the technology development. So I think we have to be careful with that scalability aspect, so we don't try to do one size that fits all, but we find meaningful ways of differentiating the different applications.
Good. Okay, we have a question way over there.
I'm just curious for Blake and Peter, just when you're winning business, what do you think is that differentiating factor? Is it a particular product capability? Is it domain expertise, or some combination of the two? And then I'd like to hear the corresponding view from Exxon and GP as what are the critical factors driving that decision of who to partner with?
So question is what is your differentiation? What do you believe is your company's differentiation going forward? Yeah.
So why do we win? Well, it's being able to provide at the end value in one of those areas that I mentioned before for a customer. And more often than not, it's a combination of the technology as well as the expertise. And when I say expertise, it may be the application expertise, it may be the support. If you're a large user, that support is really important. If you're a machinery builder, then that may be the assistance in innovating to be able to drive a few dollars out of your machinery to be able to be more competitive on the market or to reach new markets. So it's typically a combination of the technology and the expertise. For Rockwell, we think that the scalability of our control is a big plus, that you don't have to learn multiple systems, that you can have a single platform that's multidiscipline, that is good for process, discrete, or batch, and then the ability to stay with the implementation of that technology from start to finish, from the consulting services, the implementation, to the lifecycle support, and eventually the migration.
Peter?
If I look at it from an ABB perspective, I think I can say this along the things, the services, and the people. I mean, the first thing is if you have a project and you need low voltage motors, you need drives, you need switchgear, then obviously those things have to be of the right quality and reliability, and they have to be competitively priced. So you've got the things component to it. You have the people in terms of the application understanding, having the right dialogue on the requirements, doing intelligent engineering, combining the right pieces of software. But then the service dimension along the life cycle of the asset is really very crucial also, because, I mean, we're not talking about IT stuff that you discard like 3-4 years down the road. We're talking plants that are in operation for decades. So actually the ability to then also have meaningful product lifecycle policies, people who understand what's out there and are able to support that over the life cycle of the asset, including evolving that over the life cycle. I think that's a key differentiator, and specific to ABB perhaps, our ability to pull in the power and the automation that are always there in combination is really often a big plus for us.
I would say we're very clear about what problems we need solved. So the suppliers that we select are going to be those that address those specific problems that we've identified and described. The other thing is, I don't know that it's either Don or our expectation that there's only going to be one supplier providing a solution. You know, there was a question earlier about how do we accelerate it. Competition causes the acceleration. And so if we have multiple suppliers that are trying to solve the problems that we've identified, stuff will happen at a much faster pace.
So I think from GP's perspective, we're very clear as well. We look for partners that are complementary and are stronger in areas than we are. And in some cases, our industry is like this. We have the technology in place, it's turned on. We just need to put it to work and use it. And so when we look at partners that are complementary, we want people that can actually do. So JDI, just do it.
You know, I would like to ask you folks in the audience a question. Could we have a show of hands if you think open systems are good for our industry? Could we have show of hands? Okay, fair amount. Could we have show of hands if you think open systems are not good for our industry? Any hands going up, right? But anyway, I mean, I think we all have to start thinking about where we are going, where the world is going, you know, really. Bill, you have a question? Okay, go ahead. Okay, could we have a mic, please?
Good question, Andy. We all agree on open systems, and we have for many years. The definition is the key, right? It's interoperability, which we don't achieve. Even though people advertise it, they have some ways to achieve it. That takes layers of complex interfaces and software and create very brittle systems. I think it was 3 years ago here at ARC, and we had a panel of vendors. And a user, who named his company, I won't mention it, said, "You're all talking good stuff, but I can't, after all these years, take controller from each of you, connect them on my system with one software configuration platform, and have them work all together." So we have sort of this double speak about open systems, so the definition is absolutely critical. I think that's certainly what Exxon's trying to really drive at and get to. It's just a little unclear how we're going to get there.
And, right, that's what you're trying to do? Yeah, right. Okay, let's see, a question about, yeah, please.
So
raise your hands if you have questions.
I'd like
okay, we have a question back there, okay, yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to reflect that a little bit back. So typically we're talking about what are the implications of these technology shifts on the manufacturing operation side and what are our workforces of the future. And I would like to ask what you see as the automation supplier of the future, and if you also need there certain changes, because in the end, talking about open systems, I have quite a belief that this is not really part of the core DNA of our traditional suppliers, because the installed base and the related high entrance barrier used to be the main insurance for them to keep their business and to keep others out. And so maybe things which start as a step change, running through all of the filters, all of the constraints, services, etc., so that might come out way more flattened than you have started in the beginning. And so my question is, can we really realize what we are looking for with the traditional basis, or do we also need disruptive changes within our vendors or within the vendor base and the landscape of suppliers?
Who wants to start? You want to start, Blake?
Sure, I'll dive in. So obviously, automation suppliers are going to look a lot more like industrial software companies in the future. It's becoming rarer when you're able to differentiate on clever mechanical design. Not that that's not crucially important, but it's being taken more and more as an ante. And so much of that innovation is going to take place with the software. We're going to have to add people who have those skills. I mentioned before, it's going to be a lot more about partnering as well for those of us in this space if we want to remain relevant. And those partners can be small, they can be very large. We have a vibrant partnership with Microsoft, with Cisco, with AT&T, and so we're going to have to do more of that where they have thousands and thousands of developers working on a particular technology that's going to be a piece of the overall manufacturing productivity story. And if we don't do that, then you are going to see disruption in terms of the key players within the manufacturing automation space.
Peter?
Well, if you look at it, I think we're on a journey here. I mean, 20 years ago, I think roughly you could price a project by the number of cabinet feet that you were delivering. So you were walking along all those cabinets, and on the basis of how long the row of cabinets would be, you could probably price the project. I think we've moved away from that, but we'll move even further in that discussion. I think we will, as the supply industry, also have to show that we could provide value not just in shipping boxes, but actually at engaging in, for instance, pre-feed, and then contributing to cost savings in the overall concept. So when you design the process, the question of how will you control the process and how do you design the process are intimately linked. If you look at the aerospace industry, since Don was talking about them earlier, many of those planes they are flying today, you wouldn't be able to fly without the control systems that are part of the design of the plane. I think the same is true for the process industries, that if you think control systems, control concepts early on, and the way you power and automate those processes, you will actually come to different designs that save you a whole lot more cost if you actually have a holistic view at those early on in the process. So I see a shift here in terms of how we work together, rather than sort of only a shift from hardware to software.
Yeah. I would add to that, this morning I asked folks to raise hands who are here first time. And in a way, a third of you are here for the first time. In a way, from my point of view, I believe many of those people are trying to disrupt our industry. So I think the established players, in my view, have to provide value to their customers going forward. Otherwise, I think companies are ready to help. Okay, let's see. Okay, we have a question over there.
Yes, Andy, actually, I would continue on the theme. I was going to ask, there are a lot of people like myself who are here for the first time. What do you think is the reason that brought them here? What do you think is the reason they're going to come here again for a few years? And what is the mutual responsibility between people who have been here in the industrial automation space, and those of us who are coming in either because of IoT or analytics or machine learning, so that this is mutually beneficial to both sides?
Well, okay, maybe I will start. In my view, obviously there's a lot of buzz about IoT. When you come to think about it, in consumer IoT, there's not much money in it. The real money is in industrial IoT, adding intelligence, smart machines that we talked about. So I think there's a lot of reasons for new players to come into our industry and certainly try to disrupt. So I will actually ask Peter to.
Yeah, look,
expand.
I would also say, I mean, through much of this morning, we've been hammering ourselves a little bit for being so locked in, rigid, kind of closed. I think the sign of so many new companies being here is also a sign that we're actually on a journey to more openness, because there's a lot of, if you look at today's systems, they're actually not completely monolithic systems that only big corporates provide, but they're a combination of parts from the main vendors who've been in this industry for a long time. But there's actually already today, if you really look at the deliveries of many of the systems, there is increasing components, and that is only possible because systems are on a journey to being more open. So many of the people who are here are not just here sniffing out new business, but they're in the business already. And I think that's something we should also acknowledge. So we're making progress also. It's not just we're dreaming of something remote. We're actually on a journey and are achieving some of that progress already.
Absolutely, agree. Okay, we have a question way over there.
Yes, we do. And this starts with the Exxon Lockheed team, but it's really applicable to the panel. Getting interoperability at the controller level is going to be a difficult task. So has the Exxon Lockheed team settled upon or suggested strongly several communication protocols that already exist? Or have you developed a detailed set of functional and behavioral requirements for a protocol to be developed, let's say?
Well, so this is a subject of the Q&As that those who submitted them as a result of Industry Day we will speak to, but I will answer it here from the stage. So we do have a short list of candidates for standard protocols. We acknowledge that what you're asking is an essential and challenging problem, but you're also asking for what is the work we're going to do this year. And so that's really where we're at in the process.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand. Okay, we do have a question here. Okay, right there. Yeah.
Yes, so when we talk about open, there's really multiple levels of open. There's open and interoperable, where everyone can see a standard, see a protocol, and then there's full-blown open source. In an effort to make the suppliers really uncomfortable, thinking about the fact that our digital world runs on open source technologies now with the backbone of the internet and things like that, can you provide any commentary or thoughts almost beyond what Exxon is talking about doing here, going even further toward these implementations, both hardware and software, may become open source and bring in the community? The real value there is it gives the ability for the individual or the incredibly small contributor to make a difference, as opposed to someone who happens to work for a supplier.
Open source. Blake, go ahead.
I think the current tolerance for open source, becomes greater the further away that you get from the real-time fundamental control element, where it's most important for things to be deterministic and to happen every time, and where you get safety becomes such a key element. As you get further away and you start looking at things like application code for specific types of application and supervisory control that's a little less real time, I think the tolerance for open in the definition that you're using it in becomes greater.
Peter, any comment? No? Okay. Okay, we had another question over there.
Yeah, this is Ashok Nangia from 3M Company, and I would say that yes, everybody understands that we need to go through digital manufacturing, and that means moving from data analytics to predictive analysis and optimization and stuff like that. So I think most companies do that. The issue we have is we have a lot of information coming from different segments of the industry, like GE is talking about brilliant manufacturing. There's a consortium about smart manufacturing. And today we heard some new stuff that's coming around. It will serve the industry better if all come together and explain. There's only two types of industry, discrete automation and process automation. So we can come together and say, what we are really asking, and how we'll deliver the true digital manufacturing. Thank you.
Well, let me make a comment. I think a couple of things that Ashok mentioned. SMLC, Smart Manufacturing, actually consortium. In fact, actually, they did present in yesterday's workshop. And I know their lead, Jim Wetzel from General Mills, he's in the audience. In fact, I bumped into Jim in the hallway, and they are very interested in talking to Exxon, because they want to bring some of the common things they are doing. So I believe at least they are planning to talk, and I'm sure these guys are also talking to GE as well. Do you want to comment any more on that?
I think, not all industries have the exact same requirements. It's very important to bear that in mind. So if we're talking real time here, we all say, yeah, we know what real time is, but there are people who need real time on a microsecond level, some on a millisecond level, some on a second level, and the cost levels for achieving that are actually quite different. So we're back to scalability and modularity. So a lot of this can be done with open standards, so there's absolutely no contradiction. Open standards can support modularity, can support scalability, but at the same time, what the sort of requirements that you have, say, in a steel mill with multiple drives connected in real time, and you're really talking on the level of the firing pulses for the semiconductors, that's very different real time than what you, for instance, need in a refinery. So I think we will also have to draw meaningful categories of what are the requirements we want to address, rather than say, let's solve everything in control, because that's actually going to delay the whole effort by overburdening it. I think finding the right scope and focus will be decisive for being able to deliver it in good time.
Good. Any more comments? Okay, good. Do we? Right here, Andy. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Jim Montague, Control Magazine. I was just wondering if the panelists could list 2 or 3 tools that you don't have now that you'd like to have in your facilities and applications, and maybe 2 or 3 skills that your staffs, you'd like them to have but they don't have at this time.
Anybody likes to start? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me start the conversation or the answer to the question with really, rather than tools, but what's the business problem we'd like to do a better job at solving? We still, we're not where we want to be on reliability, and so when we do root cause factor analysis on our unplanned capacity loss events, it's a combination of factors. It's a process upset, it's an equipment breakage, or it's things that people do. And so we don't really have today a solution that lets us look at that heterogeneous sources of unplanned capacity loss events and let us really fundamentally drive down to the next plateau about eliminating reliability events. And I'll stop there. That's one concise answer I can give you to that question.
A couple other areas, the cybersecurity approach that we're taking today is just not sustainable. We have to have a different solution. And then second one is lifecycle management for the control systems. What we're having to do today, keep systems operating forever to avoid the cost and the disruption of making change has got to change too. There's got to be a different solution.
Mike, any comment?
For our industry, when we look at the biggest opportunity, it is reliability. And that reliability has been roughly the same for the last 75 years. So I think it's time we start thinking differently about it.
Okay. I have a question here, folks. I'd like to focus a little bit more on people, And I know maybe we can start with you, Mike, because I know you've been researching and studying the future workforce for your plants. Could you tell us, what is your thinking? How are you trying to prepare the future workforce for your company?
When we look at the future, I think it becomes a future where you're going to have to be able to focus your talent, and that talent is going to affect not only one operation but multiple operations. I think it's the only way you survive in the future. the access to that talent is going to get increasingly difficult as we all retire. And I think we're all looking at less availability of people, and those people that are available have a greater degree of talent than they do today.
Okay. Good. Any other comment, Blake?
Well, just the importance of lifelong learning, because you take the smartest person in the world with all the relevant education as they come out of school, and it's not going to be sufficient as technology changes 10, 15, 20 years from now. And so the ability to look at that continuous training and experience as a competitive differentiator as opposed to just a cost of doing business is going to be key.
I'd also add that I think you'll increasingly need T-shaped profiles, so people need to be good at what they're doing, but at the same time, with systems being more integrated, if people are not able to actually reach out to the neighboring parts of their organization, to neighboring organizations also, you would lose a lot of problem-solving potential that's otherwise there. So I really think this cross-disciplinary, cross-organization ability is something that the future workforce will need even more than already today.
Good. Let's see, any other question out there? Okay, you're getting anxious, getting hungry, I guess, you know. So, well, let me, we have a question here, folks. Yeah, thanks.
So one of the key aspects that you mentioned in this new vision was the security side. So everything's going to be tied together, that you got to feel that the cybersecurity, the security of this new platform has to be there. And you just said just a few seconds ago that what we're doing now isn't working, we have to design it in there. The challenge is that whole IT and security landscape changes radically all the time. Just a philosophical question, do you think we really can build in security that's not going to have to be changed on an ongoing basis just because that landscape is always changing so dramatically there? So just your thoughts on the whole security side and how you're going to have to manage that, even if you can build in whatever you think you can do today, could be totally different tomorrow.
So if you look at our words, I mean, we have adaptive security measures in the statement of characteristics that we'd like to see. So that's an attempt to address the problem. But honestly, it's going to come down to authentication. How do we know that the sender of that signal is trusted? And we may have to have constantly evolving and adapting means to establish authentication. The authentication problem is never going to go away. The means by which we solve authentication may change. And I'll stop there.
I think there's something else more generic. We tend to think about what the new approach and new technologies are going to be based on what our experiences are with the old stuff. I don't know how many times I've been told that we can't make this change because of all these other problems that we've had to deal with. I would make the argument that one of the reasons why we're making these changes is that those problems don't occur. So the same thing applies with cybersecurity. I realize what we have to do today in order to support it, but we shouldn't assume that the solution is going to have those same problems. It needs to have a different set of problems, perhaps, but we shouldn't be looking at the change and assuming that those things that occurred with the old technologies are going to occur with the new ones. There's got to be a totally different approach.
Good. What I like to do is now maybe ask each of the panelists maybe to prepare for what at least I call digital transformation, next generation digital transformation for our companies. What is the one piece of advice you would give to companies, what they need to do? Could we start maybe with you, Blake?
Obviously, start with the problems that you're trying to solve, and look at what changes in your fundamental business processes can help address those problems before you start looking at the technology and the skills that you need to deploy the solution.
My piece of advice is that if you want it to change, pick up the mirror, look in the mirror, change that person first.
I think we all have to work together. You know, historically, the way, at least in ExxonMobil, the way we solve problems many times, we did it internally and solved them with our own solutions, and that's not what we're trying to do today. Today, we're working with all of our suppliers, and we want to partner with them, work very closely with them to develop solutions. But we also, across the various owners and operators, we need to be working together. As we've pointed out, we do not want an ExxonMobil-only solution in any of the discussions that we're having with our suppliers. In fact, I would argue that it's critically important that suppliers not develop solutions just for us, because you're focusing in on your success, on how much business you do with us. We may be large, but we're not large enough for that. And so whatever solutions you're coming up with, it's got to satisfy all of the users and operators, but that'll grow the market share potentially for you and make it much easier for you to make change.
A lot has been said that I can only echo, but I think the nature of collaboration and understanding what problem we solve is so important, because unlike the previous industrial revolutions, which were more described as revolutions once they had happened, on this one we see the technology drivers all pointing in a direction, and there's analysis suggesting there's 30% productivity potential. But I think it's really important we start from the potential that we're trying to unlock, as opposed to all the nice widgets we get from technology, so that we don't just build something that uses all the technologies, but that we build something that actually creates the value.
Yeah, unambiguously from us, I would say that the plateau we want to challenge is, you know, can we collaboratively move to the next level of performance? And I think that's what it's going to take. So we're proposing a way of doing this, you know, a collaborative effort among suppliers, new entrants, possibly systems integrators that we haven't had in our space, and the using companies. That's what we're asking for in terms of preparation for this digital future.
Yeah. I will really emphasize that I think it's critically important for our industry to start innovating. You know, I think for too many years, you know, I think we are, yes, making incremental improvements, and if we don't do it as an industry, I think somebody on the outside would start to do this. So I think it's important, and we have to work together to innovate together, and that will be good for our industry. Yeah. With that, I really like to thank the panel. Please join me giving hand for the panel, for the speakers, and their discussion, and so forth. Yeah.